So at this time, I'd like to welcome our author and expert on nursing research, Janet Hauser. Take it away, Janet.
Good morning. This is Janet Hauser, and I'm just delighted to welcome you to this webinar about my textbook. And there's a couple of reasons. The first is that I'm very passionate about our capacity to develop the next generation of nurse scientists and nurse researchers. I was first grasped by the concepts of nursing research by a professor in my master's program back when we didn't teach this undergrad. And it has been one of those passions that's lived with me my entire career. And it's turned into a career that is focused on developing and creating evidence for practice and helping others do so. And so it's within that context that I want to share my text with you. First, a little bit about me and how I came to this point. I really have had a very versatile career. I started as a staff nurse. My specialty was pediatrics. I worked in the neonatal ICU for a time. I went back to school and became a nurse practitioner, and it was then that I really became engaged in nurse research, and the seeds of what would later become a desire for evidence-based practice were planted then, and planted by a very gifted professor that I credit with igniting my passion later. I later became a nurse administrator and worked for the Sisters of Mercy in various hospitals and health systems for them for more than 20 years. And during that process, one of the departments they gave me to oversee was research. I found myself totally engaged by that department. I would sneak away and spend time there. I was just completely passionate about the work that they were doing. And so I decided to go back to school, and I got my doctorate in applied statistics and research methods. And I was particularly interested in applied, not theoretical statistics, because I was focused on evidence-based practice and how research becomes a basis for practice. The advantage of having a program, though, that also included research methods was that I had to have equal coursework on quantitative, qualitative, and evaluation methods. And that really helped me appreciate and become an expert in a range of methodologies and how they all contribute to the evidence that is at the basis of our practice. I then went into academics, and I taught for nearly a decade in undergraduate and graduate programs. I taught nurses, pharmacists, physical therapists, health services administrators. I taught research methods, quantitative analysis, evidence-based practice. I taught undergraduate statistics, and I taught graduate biostatistics, and I also taught quantitative methods and biostatistics at the doctoral level. After that time as a faculty, which was a wonderful time for me, I became Dean of the College of Health Professions at Regis University in Denver, Colorado. Remained Dean for around 6 years, where I got an opportunity to work with a multitude of interprofessional groups and began to have a real gut-level appreciation for how nurses function on interprofessional teams, particularly when it comes to scholarly work and research. And a year ago, I was privileged to be made provost at Regis University, a job that I've loved since. But one of the advantages of remaining in an academic institution for me is it's enabled me to continue my scholarly work. It's enabled me to continue being someone who does research and doesn't just read about it. And so it helps me when I write to put in those very real barriers and issues that we are up against when we try to conduct research in practice settings. I'm still a peer reviewer for 3 journals, and just this year I was asked to do reviews for the Mental Measurements yearbook, looking at the psychometrics of instrumentation, and so it's enabled me both to teach, to be in administration, and to practice in the areas of research. Part of the reason that I'm passionate about nursing research is that I have such a strong belief of its importance in contributing to the basis of our practice. If you're like me, when I taught undergraduate nurses, it was difficult to get them passionate about evidence-based practice and research. Oftentimes they were in that class and they were thinking, I want to get into my clinical courses. How is this going to help me? And so I spent a good deal of time in my classroom helping them understand how important it is that we conduct, read, use nursing research as a basis for our practice. And in fact, the first part of the book is focused on generating this idea of how important it is for us to focus on evidence as a basis for our practice. Of course, we know that nurses are accountable for our patients and for patient care, but our nurses are accountable for the outcomes our patients achieve, and we know those outcomes are better when they are based on evidence-based practice. I've also become to appreciate even more, as I've looked at the interprofessional aspect of healthcare, that nurses are a primary part of the healthcare team. We contribute to the knowledge that turns into evidence-based care. And I like to think that we're the center of the storm, that we are the ones with the patient's best interest at heart. We're looking in a holistic way, and that we have to contribute evidence to that practice team as well as everyone else. We have to be on a level playing field, and we have to be able to speak credibly and as experts to evidence-based practice. We also have an extremely informed consumer base. They have read the web, they've read the studies, and they are demanding that we have safe, effective care. They're asking the right questions about whether we know our interventions are effective. But it's not just internal to our profession. The Institute of Medicine has made a call that by 2020, 9% of our clinical decisions should be based on evidence. But the most important reason to me, having been a nurse for more than 40 years, is because we are a profession, and research is one of the basic premises of a profession. And so it is important that our nurses learn to read, use, and create evidence. Having taught research and statistics for so long, I became just a little bit frustrated with the textbooks that were available to me and also to the books that were available to practicing nurses. The first book that I wrote for Jones and Bartlett is not the one we're talking about today, but it was a small trade book called Nursing Research for the Bedside Scientist, and it was intended to help staff nurses understand how they use research. It was so well received because of its conversational approach that I moved on to writing a textbook for undergraduates, because my experience had been that research books, statistics books, are often complex, and that the writing was dense and sometimes difficult to wade through. It seems that the books I used had very little support for online coursework, and I have taught both research methods, quantitative analysis, and statistics in an online environment, and I found that I just could not find the support for those courses that I needed. I also saw that most books tried to serve both undergraduates and graduate students, and as a result didn't serve either particularly well. They were either too complicated for undergrads or not in depth enough for our graduate students. And so I set out to write in 2006 an understandable book that was less complex, that could actually be engaging as I was engaged in graduate school about the idea of doing research and translating it into evidence for our practice. And so I approached this textbook as an applied approach to nursing research. It's intended to help nurses understand how they use nursing research in their practice as a basis for evidence-based practice. It's focused primarily on how to read research and how to use that research as evidence for professional nursing practice, even if that evidence is about such things as instrumentation, or if that evidence is about which kinds of tests are appropriate. It follows my earlier book, which I called the Bedside Science Model. And this model is intended for staff nurses to be able to read and use evidence and perhaps create very small studies that they can use as the basis for their own practice. I also found that I wanted this book to not create that artificial tension between qualitative and quantitative research. I have to admit that I'm somewhat annoyed when I open a research book and I see titles such as qualitative versus quantitative research. I believe that both of them are absolutely essential in a holistic profession such as ours, that we need to understand the meaning of the patient's experience, and it requires qualitative research to do that. I believe that we need to develop models of the way that the world works and the way our patients interact and develop their own health models, and that requires qualitative research. But I also believe we need generalizable evidence that's quantitative and helps us understand the role of error and helps us understand how confident we can be with the findings. I am a real fan of mixed methods, and so I create no such artificial divisions in this textbook between qualitative and quantitative research. Typically, in each chapter, it will talk about a subject and how that subject looks in a quantitative study and how that subject looks in a qualitative study, and what are the things they have in common. It enables us not to look at ourselves as qualitative nurse researchers or quantitative nurse researchers, but simply nurse researchers. And finally, it was important to me in an applied nursing research book that we understand that we cannot have models that are purely practice, that we need models in which academic scholars, those with advanced education in research design and implementation, can partner with those in practice. Those in practice need to understand how to design solid studies, how to read them, how to use them. And those in academics need to understand how patients and nurses are affected by the research we're generating. So why I chose this approach was because of what I heard from my students and because of what my own experience was with textbooks. I wrote it in a very conversational tone. One of the nicest reviews I read on it said, "It's as if you've sat down with an experienced researcher over a cup of coffee and she's giving you advice." It's specifically intended for undergraduates, and as we'll see later, that doesn't mean it can't be used by other populations, but I wrote it for the undergraduate nursing student. It has a lot of features in it that aim to make complex subject more understandable. I think research and statistics is complicated enough. We don't need to make it worse by the way we write about it. And there is rich online support available, even up to the point of being able to populate an online course with this material. And so I have written this text specifically for undergraduate nursing students. I'm not attempting to get at the complexity level that would help a graduate student with a research project or help a doctoral student plan a dissertation. That said, I found it particularly helpful for post-licensure nursing students, those RNs that are returning for their baccalaureate degree and may have difficulty understanding why they need to study nursing research. And yet we know this is a key differentiator for our post-licensure nursing students. They need to be the ones taking the lead in evidence-based practice. And so this applied approach that is very practical is one that often appeals to the post-licensure nursing student. I have heard, though, a considerable number of graduate students who say it's helpful for them as a supplement, particularly if it's been some time since they've been in their baccalaureate program. I've heard from graduate students that it's a nice transition for them to use as a reference book from their undergraduate to their graduate coursework. And I have heard from a substantial number of practicing nurses that they keep it as a resource book on their bookshelf. And I know that my resource at JMB told me that we had a record low number of people that were returning the textbook used, which indicates they are keeping it as a resource book. And so I think that while I have written it specifically for undergraduate nursing students, it has a broad range of applicability in our profession. The text itself is fundamentally based on how do we use nursing research as a basis for evidence-based practices. That means, of course, that we have to be able to read it critically, that we have to be able then to decide how we can use it with a level of confidence. And then because it's also aimed as a basis for creating small science projects, it has an element of how you can actually build research projects. It covers both qualitative and quantitative research in equal depth, and important to me, not in opposition, but how they work together to inform our practice. It's because I do believe evidence-based practice for nursing is much as a three-legged stool. Having been involved in evidence-based practice since the 90s, the first models as they came out in the very early 90s were focused so strongly on randomized trials as a sole source of evidence. And I found, as a nurse who tried to practice in a holistic way, that this felt very limited to me. This does not mean that we don't have that we don't have an emphasis on the best scientific evidence. And this book covers how we determine and reveal what that evidence is. And of course, there is a strong reliance on the results of experiments, the results of quantitative studies. And even though it's lower on the evidence scale, I believe that we have to also bring into bear expertise of practicing nurses, and I would say the practicing healthcare team. I think in developing evidence-based practice, we have to consider the clinical experiences of expert panels, of those groups, practice groups that have been brought together to draw information together, and consensus statements. And so the book refers to all of these sources of evidence and how to put them in the context of evidence-based practice. And finally, because we are a holistic profession, we have to consider the desires and preferences of the patient in evidence-based practice. We need to consider if they are satisfied with their lives. We need to understand how their health conditions impact their quality of life. In particular, we need to understand the burden of their treatments and the interventions we're asking them to undertake. And I believe this is really where qualitative studies shine. And that's where my philosophy that we need to bring together quantitative and qualitative evidence along with the clinical experiences of experts helps us discover evidence-based practices. The book itself is laid out in a way that's logical. We start out with the importance of evidence-based practice. We look at that apply to all research and evidence. This is where we have specific focuses on the research process, ways of knowing. We have ethical and legal considerations. We then have a section of the book which is how we plan for research. And this is the typical approach to research in which we look at design, in which we think about the validity of research, and how we collect a successful literature review. The book then moves into the research process. And this is where we cover sampling strategies, measurements, data collection, and validity. I want to point out that in the chapter on validity, we cover in some depth all of the ways that we make sure we have internal and external validity for quantitative studies. But we also have an expanded section of this chapter that is focused on the trustworthiness of qualitative research and how we evaluate qualitative research for inclusion in evidence-based practice. I've used the latest thinking about how we approach trustworthiness for qualitative research to update this version of the book. And it's an extensive process of looking at what's controversial and what's not controversial. I really base this chapter on the fact that both quantitative and qualitative researchers are interested in truth, and how do we figure that out? I then move on to research that describes populations, looks at population health, and in particular, looks at descriptive data and how we calculate and report it. Research that measures effectiveness. These are the quantitative designs and inferential analysis that helps us draw conclusions and generalize research. I then move into research that describes the meaning of an experience, or qualitative research, how it's designed, and how we measure whether it's trustworthy or not. And then finally, an expanded chapter that's on the translation of research to practice and organizational evidence-based practice models, 6 of them to be exact, so that we can contrast EBP models for organizations that are community-based, home care-based, hospital-based, or in other agencies. The chapters are laid out to build upon early understanding. It starts with objectives that you can use to inform your sessions. We then have key terms at the beginning of the chapter, and they're repeated in the margin notes, where they are then repeated in the text. This helps students keep from flipping back and forth to trying to define a new term that they read in the text. Each of the chapters starts with what is my personal favorite in terms of a feature, and it's called Voices from the Field, or Scenes from the Field. And this is how this element of the research process comes alive. It applies it to a real problem or a real research study from the field, and then it draws a conclusion as to how it represents that particular subject matter. We then, of course, have a subject overview of the content. And then in each chapter, there are guidelines in the form of a checklist for how you read and evaluate that particular element of a research study. There's a final section on using the research in practice and how to create a basic research study. So each chapter has this structure of reading, using, and creating research. At the end of each chapter is a summary that helps pull together the concepts for the students. And in reading reviews, many students tell me that they read the summary first, and it helps them to pull the chapter together better as they're reading. There is a critical appraisal exercise in each chapter that has a contemporary article and questions related to how we study it. This text is different. It's written in very clear and unambiguous language. There are many, many examples in the text, and it focuses on topics that aren't usually included with the level of emphasis I've given them. There is a whole chapter on research ethics and legal issues, which are becoming more prominent for us. I find that many books include ethics integrated throughout, but this book makes a point that ethics and legal issues are primary ones that nurses are concerned with. I might note for you that if you are teaching this class in a 16-week session and the last week is your summary, I often take this chapter as not a specific reading assignment for a class, but I ask them to read it and complete one of the online ethics programs as a requirement. I have really, in this particular text, focused on technology. We've had an explosion in technology in society, but we've also had an explosion in how we can use technology to better collect data and to better analyze it. And then I have increased the emphasis on translational research and how we communicate results, without which our evidence will not be widely practiced. Throughout the book, there are useful and very straightforward tools. An example is in the final chapter, there is a template for laying out a poster so that one can just pull up a PowerPoint and insert boxes they need. There are checklists for how one can find sections in a research article. And so there are very useful tools throughout the text. When I talk with faculty and solicit their feedback, and when I'm speaking at research conferences across the country and ask them, how do you use the book? What I've heard from them is that the features, in particular the chapter structure, have made the content easier for them to prepare for their coursework and easier for their students to understand. I had many faculty tell me that they use the critical appraisal exercises as a quasi-journal club for their students, and that they walk through the answers with them. I will note for you that the answers for the critical appraisal exercises are online. We also have the Navigate 2, which is an exceptional online support that helps make course design and management more efficient. These are digital assets, and you can actually use them to populate your online course, making that whole process less burdensome. I will tell you that this thought goes back to my first edition in 2006, when I was struggling to put together online courses on statistics and research methods. And J&B and I worked together to make sure that you could use the online materials directly in your online courses. You can also use this in multiple course formats and links, including many of us have accelerated courses. I have taught this course in 16 weeks, 8 weeks. I've even taught it in 5 weeks, and I have to tell you, those 5-week courses are something. We go at quite a clip, but I have taught it in 5 weeks. I've taught it in evening classes. I've taught it in weekend classes. I've taught it online, and I've taught it in hybrid courses. And so it adapts itself well to virtually any of these. It's particularly designed to have 16 chapters, so it fits well in a 16 or an 8-week course. I talk to a lot of students. In fact, later today I'm sitting in on a class, And at each time I ask the students, what do they think? Tell me what's good about the text. Tell me what I could improve. And the beauty of being at the 4th edition is to have been able to incorporate all of those suggestions from the last 10 years. They tell me it is easy to understand. And when I read the reviews of it online, that's the #1 review that comes up. This book is easy to read and it's easy to understand. They tell me it's easy to apply the concepts because there are so many features in the text that help them understand how to do that. The feature in particular, which is where to find it, in which sometimes it's just difficult in a research article to find some of the information. And so that one points them to, here's the places where you might find this information, and here are all the myriad of words it might be called. In particular, they like the margin notes called gray matter. They use these as study guides. They've told me that when they're reviewing for an exam, they particularly look at the gray matter features. And I've heard good feedback about the critical appraisal exercises that help them immediately apply these things. And I come back to the students love this voices feature. They find it very engaging. They find it helpful. And I have to tell you, it's wonderful listening to nurses' stories and being able to capture them in this feature. There are many things that are new in this 4th edition. It took me over a year to update it because there are so many new developments in evidence-based practice. It's written in the context of the Institute of Medicine's call for nursing's future and for the future of evidence-based practice. I refer to the Institute of Medicine several times in the book. An important consideration, though, is our emphasis on understanding diversity. And so throughout the book, there are ways that we can make sure that we represent vulnerable populations. And there is, in fact, a whole evidence-based section on how to recruit marginalized and vulnerable populations. We have evidence-based ways to improve response rate. There's been a considerable amount of research done on how we can get those in marginalized and vulnerable populations to respond, and in general, how do we improve and evaluate those responses. As I referred to earlier, there's an expanded section on trustworthiness with the latest thinking about how we look at trustworthiness in qualitative studies. And there is content that's not in the other nursing research and evidence-based practice books that I have reviewed. As I said, we have a full chapter devoted to ethics, but this chapter, this time, has included the newest recommendations for animal research. And while previously I've often thought, and other researchers thought, that nurses don't use animals in research, that's not necessarily true. And in fact, on our IRB, we reviewed a student project that used rats. And so since I've always wondered about the ethical treatment of animals, I added a section here. And in fact, the very newest finding, which is that the National Institute of Health has now released all of its chimpanzees, and that they have that chimps in captivity have become a protected animal, and that computer models are making animal research less and less necessary. I've added issues about big data, the issues involved in using data warehouses, and in fact, there are some who say that big data and data science are the future of evidence-based practice. And so we have expanded sections throughout the book about using big data and data warehouses. There is also a section on discussing the ethics of using cell lines, such as is represented in the book about Henrietta Lacks. And the ethical concerns of using social media. We think that's an easy process for data collection, and yet there are many things we have to think about the ethics of it. There is advice for being culturally competent as a researcher, and that's embedded throughout the book. There's expanded content on modifications to the PICO. We lived and died by the PICO question for so long that as an applied researcher, I often found it difficult to apply to anything but interventional research. So we have added the more popular PICOT question that adds time, and the PECO question, which is used for descriptive and epidemiological research. There is an expanded section on non-traditional approaches to drawing representative samples from groups that may be hard to represent. And what I have found most important is with online surveys, response rate is becoming more and more difficult to calculate. And so the latest research on the contemporary thinking about online response rate calculation, and there is a move to stop thinking about response rate as the only standard and to start thinking about effective sample size. and there's a good section describing this. At the translational section, there is new focus on latest kinds of work being done in settings, such as scoping reviews. Even though they're controversial, and I refer to that in the book, we still need our students to understand what's happening. There's a major revision, and I think this is one of the biggest changes in the 4th edition, is a focus on the use of technology for research and data gathering. There's a focus on web-based data collection, contemporary methods, how do we collect data via apps, text messaging, social media, and what are the ethics of that? As I mentioned earlier, big data warehouses, and how do we use data science? And I'm particularly excited about photo voice technology, a new way for collecting qualitative data that lets us look at what the subject is actually seeing and their reflection simultaneously. The delivery methods supported by this book are broad because I have used it to teach a broad range. There's extensive online resources for faculty there, exam banks, there are exercises that you can use both in an online course and in a classroom that make it very active. These can be adapted to online. There are included discussion threads and learning tools, and the length of this text was specifically based on how you might use it for class periods. These exercises and exam questions can be adapted to team-based learning and to problem-based learning, and they're both supported by this text. I think that one of the best ways to teach this content is to make maximum use of Navigate 2. The faculty at Regis that are using the book tell me that this is an invaluable resource for them. It helps you both assess the comprehension of the students and to use the course materials most effectively. It gives you many mobile-ready course materials for online courses and for students that can study the way that they study now. It maximizes the use of case studies and the critical appraisal exercises that are at the end of each chapter. You can even use all of these exercises in a flipped classroom where you ask the students to prepare ahead of time and use these skill builders and exercises in the classroom as application so that the students are spending their class time in active and collaborative interactive learning. I also particularly like the Where to Look feature that helps you study an article and find all the pieces that you need to assess quickly. There are many resources online for the students. They can access the ebook. There is a study center for them to practice the material and reinforce their comprehension. I've understood that students really like this section because it's got a real variety of practice activities in this virtual center. There's elements to assess and evaluate the comprehension of course material. There's a testing center. It has quizzes and examinations. And then there are analytics in it where you can use this data to determine how you should focus study time, and it helps the student understand what to review, how to prepare for assessment, and which learning tools to use. And now I'm going to ask Liam to give you a tour of the Navigate 2 Advantage Access.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate that. So I'm going to bring up my demo course while I'm just getting access to get that pulled up for you. I just want to let you know, with Navigate 2, it does come with every new textbook. So when you purchase a new textbook, it comes with an access code included. And then we also have available at a digital only, and that is at a discount for your students as well. You can request a trial course of Navigate 2 if you want to demo it and see what it looks like. And you can also request a demo of the product itself. I'm giving you a quick overview, but if you want a deeper demo or training session, you can reach out to your account manager, and we can set that up and have a more of a one-on-one demo session. And then I also want to mention that Navigate 2 can also integrate into Blackboard and Canvas. So if you want to use this along with Canvas or Blackboard, you do have the capability of doing that, and the account managers can send you documents for that as well. And then we do have other test banks that we can create if you have another learning management system that you have to use. But this is Navigate 2, which I'm showing you right now. Really the main page when you log in is this Lessons tab. Right now I'm in as an instructor, but a student view is going to be very similar to what we're seeing right now. So once you log in, you'll see here all the chapters are listed here right out of the box. When you select a chapter, it's going to open up all the content that we've pre-built for you And this is really the content that your students will have access to. If you needed to, you do have the ability to add in your own content, which I'll show you in a few moments. And you can also hide any content from your students if you needed to. But through here, you'll see the items like the learning objectives, the PowerPoint slides, which are very thorough, as well as lecture outlines, and we've added in discussion questions for each chapter. But what I really want to bring up and point out is the e-book right here. So when you select the e-book, it'll bring you directly to the first page of that chapter. But once you're in the e-book, you will have access to the entire book. So anywhere from the cover all the way to the last page in the book, you can get access to when you're in here. In addition to reading the e-book on the computer like I'm showing you right now, we do have an app that is available as well. So through the app, it's called Navigate eReader. It is a free app that students can download through the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And through the app, they can download the e-book, so if they want to take the book offline on a mobile device, they can certainly do that. And then built into the e-book, as you can see, you can turn the page like a regular book. But students and instructors can also add in notes into the e-book. And they can also come over here and add in highlights into the e-book as well. Now, as the lead instructor in the course, the lead instructor will be able to share their notes and highlights with the participants in the course. Students can only come in and make notes and highlights for themselves. And if you save it down here, it's going to sync it up. So if you are using the app version of the e-book as well, you can have those notes and highlights carry over. And then down here, we have table of contents. So you can easily jump to any section of the book. We do have a built-in glossary for the students to go through. And students will find glossary terms. These are dotted, underlined terms here. And if they select it, they can pull it up right from the book itself as well. And then down here, we have a resources tab. So for this book, we've added in two different types of assessments for students to go through. We have knowledge check questions, which you can see we have multiple knowledge checks throughout each chapter. These are really here for students to go through and practice. So they can go through these knowledge check questions and they can take them as many times as they like to. These are ungradable. They don't report into the grade book. But at the end of each chapter, we do have e-book quizzes. These are gradable and they will report into the grade book. So once a student has gone through and submitted the test, it will score it immediately. So they'll see their score right here. And then once they go into the grade book, that's where they can go and see what they got right and what they got wrong, as well as their score. And then as the instructor in the course, you will be able to see their score from the grade book as well. And then students will also have access to this Learning Tools tab. So from here, we've rearranged the e-books. All the e-book links are together. We added in flashcards, which are a way for students to go through the glossary terms within the book. So it's going to give them the definition, and they can put in the term, and they can see if they got it right or wrong. And then we've also added in discussion questions, so students can pull up the discussion questions right from here as well. And then as the instructor in the course, you will have access to teaching tools. So if we come over here to course material, you'll see we have an instructor's manual. So these are classroom exercises that we've added in. And then we also have the suggested answers to the critical appraisal exercises. So I'm going to pull up and just show you some of these items we've added in. So I'm pulling up just a sample of the classroom exercises that we've added in. Once again, we do have one for each chapter. And this is the critical appraisal exercises, include the answers to it for you as the instructor. Only you as the instructor will have access to this document. And then these are different discussion questions we've added. And once again, we do have a file for each chapter. Now, if we come back into the course, in addition to the instructor resources that we've added into the course for you, you do have the ability to come in and add in your own content into the course. So if you want to upload your own slides or PowerPoints or any documents that you have that you want to share with your students, you can actually very easily do that. And if you need to, you can drag and drop files from your computer, which I'm doing right over Chapter 3 here. And it's going to automatically upload those files into the course for you. So it's very easy to customize the course. You do have the ability to come over here, and if you need to, you can rearrange the chapters. So if you don't teach in the order of the book, you can very easily have that reflected into the course. You do also have the ability to add in your own topics. So if you have more content you want to add in, or maybe you have your own syllabus that you want to add into the course for your students to access, you can very easily do that. There's a plus and minus sign, so I hit the plus sign here. This gave me the new topic. So you can come over here, you can move it around, and you can name it whatever you need it to be. And then over here we have add an activity or resource, and you'll see each chapter or topic will have it. This is where you can come in, and if we come down here to resources first, you can upload a file this way if you didn't want to drag and drop the file. URL, you can link out to different websites right from here. And then we also have the ability to embed YouTube videos into the course. So if you didn't want your students going directly to YouTube, you can have them embedded into the course. That way they can do everything right within Navigate 2. And then up here we have activities. So once again, these are gradable items. So if you need to, you can add assignments for your students in here. And you also have the ability to come over here and add in discussion forums for your students as well. And these can be graded or ungraded. And then Navigate to Assessment. This is really the big item here. This is where you can create your own assessments within the course. So anything ranging from a practice activity all the way to a graded final, you can set up right here. So once you give it a name, now you can come in and choose the settings. So you have the ability to choose when it's going to open, when it's going to close, and how much time students will have on the test. And then you also have the ability, once you create the test, if you need to give students additional time, on the test, maybe they need time and a half, you do have the ability to do that for each quiz and for any student who needs that. And then as you go down, you can control how many attempts students will have. You do have the ability to control when they can review the test. So if you don't want them to be able to see what the correct answers are until the test is closed, you can do that. And then once you're done with the settings here, then you have the capability of editing the assessment, and this is going to allow you to come over to the question bank, and you can pick what questions you want to add. So we have it pre-assigned where we have quizzes for each chapter. These are suggested, a midterm and final with suggested questions, as well as practice activities in here. So if you want to come over here and very quickly create a Chapter 3 quiz, if you want to add all 10 questions we have in this category, you can do that. But you also have the capability of previewing a question. So you can see the full question along with the choices. This edit icon allows you to go in. So if you need to edit a question or any of the distractors or answers, you can do that. And then over here with the checkboxes, you can just check or uncheck what questions you want and add it to that assessment. And if you're doing a multi-chapter test or exam, you can just come over here, pick the next category, and add in the questions you need to. So once you have your assessment set up, next one we'll go over is the grade book. So if we go to Reports and Grades, the Grader Report, this is the full grade book. User Report, this is how you can pull up an individual's grade book. So if we go to Grader Report, you can come over here. As your students are enrolled in the class, they'll show up here. And then all your gradable items will show up here going left to right. So if you need to review a test to see how your students are doing, you can just select the assessment. And then you'll be able to see all the results for all students who've taken it, and if they've taken it multiple times. And you can review the attempt. So if you want to see exactly how the student did, and if you shuffled the questions in a different order for every student, you know the exact test that they took. So if they have any issues or questions, you can come over here and you can refer to it. So that is a brief overview of Navigate 2 and the content that you'll get with the nursing research book. If you are looking, once again, for further demo or would like a trial course, you can reach out to your account manager and they can get that set up for you. So at this time, I will pass it back to you, Jen.
Great. Thanks so much, Liam. That was a great presentation. I think we did have a couple of questions that we will get to shortly about Navigate 2. In the meantime, I also want to thank Janet Hauser for giving a really fantastic presentation as well. If you do have any questions, we'll be taking Q&A over the telephone in just a second. And if you do have anything else that you would like to ask, you're welcome to message me via the chat. And I do just want to turn your attention to the slide we have up on the screen now. If you would like to request a review copy, you can visit the URL we have on the screen. And as Leah mentioned, if you'd like to learn more about Navigate 2, you can visit our website at jblnavigate.com/2. There is a form there where you can request more information or more personalized product demonstration with an account manager. And Janet has also graciously given out her email address if anyone has any questions about the textbook, overall about nursing research. Liam, I had just a quick question for you from one of our instructors that had a question on Navigate 2. She just wanted to confirm, I believe you said when you first started the presentation that you can hide the quizzes and then use them as a resource, but hide them from students from seeing them. Could you just maybe explain that a little further?
Yes, there's a couple of different ways you can hide items. So you do have the ability on when I was opening up the different chapters, when you see the individual items, there's a little drop-down menu where you can hide different items. So you can hide a quiz you create or any of the other items, and then you could always go back in, and that same option will then make it visible for students to take. You can also have it set up where you want to make sure you go over them in class together. If you like to do that, you can hide them from seeing those answers, and then you can always go back and make it visible once you go over that if you want to make that available to them.
Thanks, Liam. And Betty, I'm going to ask, do we have any questions that have come in over the phone?
You have a question from the line of Linda Hardy.
Okay, go ahead, Linda.
The Navigate 2 looks like it functions very much like our Blackboard learning management system. Is there a way to upload modules or something like that to Blackboard with the course rather than using the Navigate 2 system?
Yep, Linda, this is Liam. I can answer that question. So we do have instructor resources that are available that you can upload into Blackboard, and this also same with Canvas. We had another similar question about Canvas. It doesn't upload the entire package in one upload, into Blackboard, but we do have an integration feature where you can go in, same with Blackboard and Canvas, where you can create a link in Blackboard or Canvas, and when students click on it, it will automatically log them in to Navigate 2.
Oh,
so they don't have to sign into two different places. Then what it does is, and we have documents we can provide you, but then you can pass the overall course grade from Navigate 2 would either get passed back in the Blackboard, or if you have Canvas, same thing, it would pass that grade back as a grade column within your Blackboard or Canvas gradebook.
Okay, that was one of my concerns, was I don't want two grade books. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Liam. Quick question just asking, do you think this material as a whole is too much for one semester for working nurses who were students at any level?
I have taught in the RN to BSN with this program with primarily working students. It is a lot of material, but it is pretty condensed. It is a shorter book than most of the research books. One of the comments on the reviews of it is it's not as big and heavy to carry around, and it's not as long as others. And so it's been structured to be able to get through in an 8-week or a 16-week course. I did find it, as I think any research and statistics text would be, tough to get through in 5 weeks. But I do think that it is useful, and particularly for working nurses, it's very relevant because of all of the application and because of the real live examples.
Thanks so much. At this time, I don't think we have any more questions, so I'm going to turn it back over to Janet. She had just a few additional things she wanted to say about the topic of nursing research. Go ahead, Janet.
Thank you, Jennifer, and I want to thank all the people that joined us on the line today. I appreciate your interest. You know, I just want to end this by reminding everyone in the audience, I taught much undergraduate nursing research in which the students often couldn't wait to get through my class so they could get to quote-unquote real clinical nursing. I want to reinforce this is really important work you're doing. You are creating the next generation of nurse scientists. I refer back to a teacher I had almost 40 years ago that lit the fire in me that has turned into a lifetime of devotion to research and to science, and we never know how big that pebble in the pond, what the rings it will create. And so I just want to remind all of you, if your students too can't wait to get through this material to get to clinical, this is important work. You have students in your classes who will be the next generation of nurse scientists, and I appreciate that you're all there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Janet. And I also want to thank Liam for your time today and for everyone who attended. If you'd like a preview of any of the nursing titles that we publish overall here at Jones & Bartlett Learning, I do invite you to visit our website, jblearning.com/nursing. That concludes today's presentation. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.